Is there a reason you're occupying a seat in a room meant for physicists? Professor Donald Frank's voice sliced through the lecture hall like a scalpel through silence. You. Back row. The girl trying to disappear. Monica Davis stood. 19, silent, eyes down. Look at this. Frank's laugh was surgical, precise. A scholarship case in theoretical physics. Tell me, did your guidance counselor even know what this course was when they enrolled you? Or did some affirmative action algorithm decide you belonged here? He snatched the chalk from the tray. I'm going to write an equation on this board. An equation that has broken doctoral candidates. An equation that separates the brilliant from the fraudulent. You charity admission. You're going to demonstrate exactly why some students don't belong in serious academic physics. The chalk screamed across the board. Monica stared at the equation. What Professor Frank didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, would end his career, expose his darkest secret, and unravel everything he'd built. If you're ready to hear the whole story, hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Let me tell you who Monica Davis really was. Because Professor Donald Frank had no idea, not the slightest clue. And that ignorance would annihilate him. Monica was 19 years old, a sophomore at Whitmore University. Shakti, the youngest student in advanced theoretical physics, by 3 full years. Every single day, she sat in the back row, same seat, same corner, the place where eyes never lingered. She never raised her hand, never challenged answers, never revealed what she truly understood. Monica had learned something fundamental early on, a lesson her mother had burned into her consciousness when she was just a girl. Don't let them see your full hand. Save your genius for when survival demands it. Being visible had consequences. Being brilliant meant being challenged, scrutinized, attacked. In her schools, in her neighborhood, in every space where black girls were expected to be mediocre or absent entirely from STEM fields. So Monica made herself a shadow. Present but unseeable. But here's what nobody knew. What nobody could have possibly suspected. Monica Davis had been solving graduate-level physics problems since she was 14 years old. Self-taught. No expensive tutors. No prep academies. No family connections to prestigious institutions. Just her. Late nights. Lukewarm tea. And a collection of leather-bound journals she discovered in her grandmother's attic when she was 12. Those journals changed everything. They didn't belong to Monica. They belonged to her father, a man named Marcus Davis, a man who died when Monica was only 7 years old. Monica barely remembered him. Just fragments, impressions that felt more like dreams than memories. Large hands guiding her fingers across equation symbols, the scent of old books and coffee, a deep, warm voice saying words that etched themselves into her soul forever. Numbers don't lie, baby girl. People do. That was it. That was all she had left of her father. A sentence, a feeling, a ghost made of memory and longing. Her mother never discussed Marcus. When Monica asked questions as a child, the subject shifted like sand. Her mother's eyes would cloud over. Her jaw would tighten. Her hands would find busy work. Eventually, Monica stopped asking. Her grandmother wasn't much more forthcoming. She'd simply touch Monica's cheek and whisper, "Your daddy was brilliant, sweetheart. The world wasn't ready for what he could do." For 12 years, that's all Monica knew. Her father was brilliant, but the world broke him anyway. Monica's alarm went off at 5:47 a.m., same as every morning. and it gave her exactly 13 minutes to shower, dress, and catch the 6:23 bus that would get her to Whitmore's physics building by 7:10. Early enough to claim her seat, late enough that the hallways were still empty. She moved through campus like smoke. Head down, earbuds in, no music playing. The universal signal for don't perceive me, don't approach, don't acknowledge my existence. It worked. Students passed her without a glance. Professors never learned her name beyond the roster. She was a demographic checkbox, a financial aid statistic, present but not seen. In advanced theoretical physics, she sat in the back corner by the broken radiator. The seat nobody wanted because it was either freezing or scalding, never comfortable. She'd arrive, sit, Shuckers open her notebook to a blank page and write down exactly what Professor Frank wrote on the board. Her homework was a careful performance. She'd solve each problem completely in her head first, then write out the most pedestrian solution possible. The kind of work that showed competence without brilliance. During lectures, when Frank posed questions to the class, Monica would count to 7 before looking down at her notes. Long enough to show she'd considered the problem. Quick enough to signal she hadn't found an answer. Sometimes she'd write something wrong in her notebook, just in case anyone was watching. The performance exhausted her more than the actual physics ever could. But the physics, the real physics, that happened at night. After her shift at the university library ended at 11 p.m., after she rode the bus back to her grandmother's house in the north side, after she checked that her mother was asleep and her grandmother's light was off, Monica would climb the narrow stairs to the attic. She'd pull the chain on the single bulb, unlock the trunk with the key she wore on a chain around her neck, and she'd open her father's journals, 17 leather-bound notebooks, dated from 1991 to 1995, filled with Marcus Davis's handwriting, equations that made her heart race, proofs that traditional physics said were impossible, methods that had no names because no one had published them, because no one had believed him, because someone had made sure the world never knew what her father could do. Monica would work until 3 a.m. sometimes, following her father's logic through problems that wouldn't appear in textbooks for another decade. She'd derive. She'd prove. She'd extend his work into territories he'd never reached. In those hours, in that attic, Monica wasn't invisible. She was her father's daughter. She was dangerous. And Professor Donald Frank was about to find out exactly what that meant. The chalk hitting the board sounded like bones breaking. Professor Frank stepped back from his work, arms crossed, that surgical smile still cutting across his face. The equations sprawled across the entire blackboard. Dense, brutal. A monster of partial differential equations nested inside quantum field theory, wrapped in topological constraints that made senior students physically lean back in their seats. Monica stared at it from the back row. Her pulse didn't quicken. Her hands didn't shake. Because she'd seen this before. Not this exact equation, but its skeleton, its DNA. The architectural logic underneath the chaos. She'd seen it in her father's 1994 notebook, the blue one with the water stain on the cover, page 47, written in Marcus Davis's tight, meticulous script at 2:13 a.m. according to the timestamp in the margin. He'd called it the convergence problem. He'd been trying to prove that certain quantum states could exist in classical frameworks if you approached the boundary conditions from a nonlinear entry point. He'd gotten close. So close. But the proof remained unfinished. The last entry on page 53 just said, "The answer is in the rotation. I can feel it, but I can't see it yet." Monica could see it. She'd seen it 3 weeks ago at 1:30 in the morning when she'd finally understood what her father had been reaching for. "Well?" Frank's voice shattered her thoughts. "Are you going to sit there calculating your exit route, or are you going to waste our time at the board?" Every head in the lecture hall turned toward her. 100 pairs of eyes, 100 judgments forming in real time. Monica stood. Her chair scraped against the floor. She was obscenely loud in the silence. She moved down the aisle between the tiered seats. The other students didn't whisper. They didn't move. They barely seemed to breathe. This was entertainment. This was a public execution dressed up as education. She reached the front. Professor Frank extended the chalk toward her like a sword. She took it. The stick was warm from his grip, still dusty. Monica turned to face the board. The equation stared back at her. Impossible to solve. A trap designed to humiliate, to break, to prove Frank's point that she didn't belong in this room, in this university, in this field. But underneath all that malice, underneath Frank's arrogance and cruelty, Monica saw something else. She saw her father's handwriting. She saw page 47 of the blue notebook. She saw the unfinished proof that Marcus Davis had died before completing. And she saw exactly what Frank had done. Because this wasn't just any impossible equation. This was her father's work. Stolen, repackaged, dressed up in modern notation to hide its origin. Professor Donald Frank had just handed Monica Davis the weapon that would destroy him. She raised the chalk to the board. The room held its breath. Monica's hand moved, not hesitantly, not with the careful deliberation of a student working through unfamiliar territory. Her hand moved like she was writing her own name. Muscle memory, certainty, truth. She didn't start where Frank expected. She didn't begin with the traditional boundary condition approach that would take 15 minutes just to set up the framework. She didn't waste time with the standard integration methods that doctoral students would attempt first. She started with the rotation, her father's rotation, the entry point he'd sensed but never formalized, the nonlinear approach that didn't exist in any textbook because Marcus Davis had never gotten the chance to publish it. The chalk scratched across the board, fast, confident. She wrote the first transformation, inverting the quantum operator in a way that made 2 students gasp because it looked wrong, looked impossible, looked like she was about to derive nonsense. But then she applied the topological constraint. Not after the integration. Before it. She rotated the entire problem space by approaching the boundary from inside the manifold rather than outside it. The equation began to collapse. What had looked like chaos started revealing structure, pattern, elegance. Monica's hand never stopped moving. She didn't pause to think, didn't step back to check her work. She'd done this proof 100 times in the attic. She'd extended her father's intuition into formal mathematics. She'd finished what Marcus Davis had started 24 years ago. Behind her, she heard someone whisper, "What method is that?" Someone else breathed, "I've never seen that approach." 30 seconds. She was already halfway through. She felt Professor Frank shift his weight behind her, felt his confidence beginning to fracture. He'd expected her to stall, to fumble, to write 2 lines and give up in tears. Instead, Monica was solving his impossible equation using mathematics he didn't recognize. 60 seconds. She reached the critical integration step, the place where traditional methods would spawn 3 more pages of catastrophically complex algebra. Monica bypassed it entirely. Using her father's rotation, the integral simplified to something a sophomore could solve. Beautiful, devastating, obvious once you saw it, but only if you knew where to look. 90 seconds. She wrote the final line, boxed the answer, set the chalk down on the tray. The answer sat there on the board, complete, flawless, undeniable. For 3 seconds, the lecture hall was absolutely silent. Then someone in the middle row started clapping, slow at first, then faster. Then another student joined, then 5 more, then 20. The applause built like a wave. Students stood, cheering. Some were laughing in disbelief. Others were frantically photographing the board with their phones. Monica turned around. Professor Frank's face had gone absolutely white. He was staring at the board like it had personally betrayed him. His mouth opened, closed. No sound came out. The email arrived at 11:47 p.m. that same night. Monica was in the attic, her father's blue notebook open on her lap, when her phone buzzed. The subject line made her stomach drop. Academic integrity violation. Immediate response required. She opened it. Dear Ms. Davis, you are hereby notified that a formal academic integrity complaint has been filed against you by Professor Donald Frank, Ph.D., concerning events that occurred during Advanced Theoretical Physics lecture on October 12th. You are accused of violating University Code 4.7.2, unauthorized access to proprietary academic materials. A hearing has been scheduled for November 22nd at 9 a.m. Failure to attend will result in automatic expulsion. Dean Martha Hendricks, Office of Academic Affairs. Monica read it 3 times. Her hands didn't shake. Not yet. That would come later. In unauthorized access, proprietary materials. He was claiming she'd stolen the solution. Her phone buzzed again. A campus-wide email sent to every student and faculty member in the physics department. Public, intentional, designed for maximum damage. It has come to my attention that a serious breach of academic integrity occurred in my advanced theoretical physics course today. A student gained unauthorized access to my private research files and used proprietary solution methods to falsely demonstrate knowledge she does not possess. The university is investigating. I take academic honesty extremely seriously and will not tolerate fraud in my classroom, regardless of the student's background or the political pressures to overlook such violations. Professor Donald Frank. Monica's phone exploded. Text messages, social media notifications, email after email. Is this about you? Did you actually cheat? I knew something was weird about that solution. She set the phone face down on the attic floor, pressed her palms against her eyes, breathed. This was the cost of being seen. This was what her mother had warned her about. Brilliance made you a target. Excellence made you a threat. And threatened men with power didn't fight fair. Frank had moved fast, brutally fast. Within 12 hours of her solution, he'd weaponized the entire institutional apparatus against her. The hearing was scheduled for November 22nd, the day before Thanksgiving break, when most faculty would be gone, when finding advocates would be nearly impossible, when the university could dispose of her quietly. He wasn't just trying to punish her. He was trying to erase her. Monica picked up her phone again, scrolled past the accusations and mockery to her mother's number. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Then she stopped. Because calling her mother meant explaining, and explaining meant revealing the notebooks, and revealing the notebooks meant her mother would finally have to talk about Marcus Davis, about what really happened to him, about why a brilliant physicist died broken and forgotten, about why Professor Donald Frank's career began the exact same year her father's ended. Monica put the phone down. She pulled the blue notebook closer, turned to page 1, and started reading everything her father had written about his advisor, a man named Donald Frank, because Donald Frank recognized that method. He'd seen it before, 24 years ago. In a graduate student's research proposal, he'd buried and claimed as his own. Monica's mother appeared in the attic doorway at 1:23 a.m. Monica didn't hear her climb the stairs, didn't hear the door open. She just looked up from her father's notebook, and her mother was standing there in her bathrobe, eyes red, face twisted with something between grief and rage. "Where did you find those?" Her voice was barely a whisper, broken glass wrapped in silk. Monica closed the blue notebook slowly. "Grandma's trunk, 7 years ago." 7 years. Her mother's laugh was bitter, hollow. "You've been reading them for 7 years, and you never said anything. You never wanted to talk about him. Because talking about Marcus means talking about what they did to him." Her mother stepped into the attic. The single bulb cast shadows across her face that made her look decades older. What he did to him. Monica's chest tightened. Frank. Her mother's eyes closed. A single tear tracked down her cheek. "Donald Frank was your father's dissertation advisor. Marcus was 24, brilliant, the youngest doctoral candidate in the physics program's history. He had this idea, this revolutionary approach to quantum classical boundary problems. Nobody had seen anything like it. The rotation method. He called it Method C." Monica's hands went numb. Method C. The exact approach she'd used on the board. Marcus spent 3 years developing it. 3 years of 18-hour days, of breakthroughs and failures, of notebooks filled with equations nobody else could understand. He was going to defend his dissertation in May of 1995. He'd already been offered positions at Stanford, MIT, Princeton. His career was about to launch. Her mother sat down on the floor across from Monica, picked up the blue notebook with shaking hands. April 1995, 1 month before his defense. Frank called him into his office, told him the research was interesting, but not rigorous enough for a PhD. Told him he needed to start over. Told him that if Marcus tried to publish or defend the work, Frank would ensure he never got a degree from any university in the country. "Why?" Monica's voice cracked. "Because Frank had already submitted Marcus's research to the Journal of Theoretical Physics under his own name. He'd rewritten it, changed the notation, buried your father's name completely. The paper was accepted. Published. September 1995. Novel Approaches to Quantum Classical Convergence by Donald Frank, Ph.D. That paper made his career. Got him tenure, got him his endowed chair, got him everything." The attic spun. Monica gripped the floorboards. Marcus tried to fight it, filed complaints, went to the dean, but Frank had destroyed the evidence, claimed Marcus was a disgruntled student trying to steal credit from his advisor. The university chose to believe the tenured professor over the black graduate student. Her mother's voice broke completely. "Your father left the program 6 months later. No PhD, no career, no future. He died believing his life's work was stolen and nobody would ever know the truth." Monica looked down at the notebook in her hands. "Until today," she whispered. Her mother met her eyes. "Until today." Monica started calling at 8 a.m. the next morning. Professor Chen, who taught quantum mechanics, and had smiled at her once in the hallway. Voicemail. She left a message explaining the situation, careful to keep her voice steady, professional. No callback. Professor Williams, advanced mathematics, who'd written excellent work on one of her problem sets. Voicemail. Another message. Nothing. Dr. Okonkwo, the department's only other black faculty member. His phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. Monica's throat tightened as she left her third message of the morning. By noon, she'd contacted 9 professors, 9 voicemails, 0 responses. She walked to the physics building, tried to catch professors between classes. Dr. Martinez saw her coming and suddenly remembered an urgent meeting. Professor Thompson's office door was open until Monica knocked. Then he called through the wood that he was unavailable. Professor Ashford looked her in the eye and said, "I'm sorry, but I can't get involved in matters concerning Professor Frank." Monica understood the distinction. Frank had 28 years of institutional power, published connections across every major physics department, the ability to destroy careers with a single phone call. These professors had families, mortgages, research grants that required university approval. She was a sophomore, a nobody, a liability. At 3:15 p.m., she went to the Office of Academic Affairs. The receptionist, a tired woman named Gloria, looked at her with something like pity. "The hearing is November 22nd, correct?" Monica kept her voice level. "Yes, 9 a.m. That's the day before Thanksgiving." Gloria's expression didn't change. The committee had limited availability. Most faculty leave campus by November 21st. The hearing officer and panel members will be present. "Who's on the panel?" Gloria glanced at her computer screen. "I can't release that information prior to the hearing." Monica leaned against the counter. "This is deliberate, the timing. You're making sure I can't find anyone to advocate for me." Gloria's fingers stopped typing. For just a moment, her professional mask slipped. She looked at Monica with exhausted recognition, the look of someone who'd watched this exact scenario play out before. "I process the paperwork, Ms. Davis. I don't make the decisions." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "But if I were you, I'd have documentation, evidence, something they can't dismiss or ignore. Because testimony alone won't be enough. Not against him." Monica left the administration building as the sun started to set. Students rushed past her, laughing, talking about Thanksgiving plans, about going home, about the break. She had 6 days. 6 days to find an advocate in a system designed to protect itself. 6 days to prove her father's stolen work was real. 6 days to fight a man who'd spent 24 years making sure nobody could. Monica pulled out her phone, stared at the contact she'd been avoiding. Her grandmother. The only person who'd been there in 1995. The only person who might know who else had witnessed what Frank had done. She pressed call. Professor Eleanor Vaughn lived 40 minutes off campus, in a house that looked like it had given up decades ago. Monica stood on the sagging porch at 4:17 p.m., her grandmother's words still echoing in her head. Eleanor was there. She knew what Frank did. But she was untenured then. She had a baby. She couldn't afford to speak up. Maybe now, maybe after all these years, she'll find her courage. Monica knocked. The woman who answered was 70-something, white hair pulled back severe, eyes sharp behind thick glasses. She looked at Monica for 3 long seconds. "You're Marcus's daughter." Not a question, a statement of fact. "Yes, ma'am." "You have his eyes." Professor Vaughn's voice cracked slightly. Come in before the neighbors start talking. The house smelled like old books and jasmine tea. Every surface was covered with physics journals, stacked papers, framed photographs from decades past. Vaughn led Monica to a cluttered living room and sat down heavily in a worn armchair. Your grandmother called me, told me what happened with Frank, told me about the hearing. Vaughn's hands trembled as she poured tea. I've been waiting 24 years for this conversation, dreading it, hoping for it. Monica sat on the edge of the couch. You were there when my father submitted his dissertation proposal. I was on the review committee, April 1995. Marcus presented Method C with such brilliance, such clarity. We all knew we were witnessing something revolutionary. The whole committee recommended immediate approval. Vaughn's jaw tightened. Frank was the senior advisor. He had final say. He told us he needed more time to review the mathematics, asked us to delay approval for 6 weeks. And then he submitted it as his own work. I didn't know. Not immediately. Frank was careful. He changed notation, restructured the proofs, made it look different enough. But when his paper came out in September, I recognized the skeleton, the logic. Marcus's fingerprints were all over it. Why didn't you say anything? Monica's voice was sharper than she intended. Vaughn flinched. I was 32 years old, untenured, a single mother with a 6-month-old baby. Frank had just been promoted to department chair. When I tried to raise concerns privately with the dean, and I was told my contract might not be renewed if I continued making unfounded accusations against distinguished faculty. She looked at Monica with eyes full of ancient shame. So I stayed quiet. I got tenure. I raised my daughter. And I spent 24 years living with the knowledge that I chose my career over your father's life. Silence filled the room like smoke. I can't undo what I did, Vaughn whispered. But I kept something. Insurance, maybe. Or evidence for a day I hoped would never come. She stood, walked to a locked filing cabinet in the corner, pulled out a manila folder yellowed with age. Your father's original dissertation proposal, dated April 3rd, 1995, with Method C fully documented, with his name on every page. She handed it to Monica. Destroy Donald Frank. The examination room was deliberately hostile. No windows. Fluorescent lights that hummed like insects. A single whiteboard. A metal table with 3 chairs on one side, one on the other. Monica sat alone. Her father's blue notebook and the 1995 proposal in her bag, waiting. The door opened at 8:47 a.m. 3 people entered. Dr. Sarah Brennan from MIT, silver-haired and severe. Dr. James Wu from Stanford, younger, carrying a tablet. And Dean Hendricks from Whitmore, her expression professionally neutral, professionally deadly. Ms. Davis. Dr. Brennan sat down without greeting. We're here to determine whether you possess the knowledge necessary to have solved Professor Frank's equation legitimately, or whether you accessed his proprietary materials as alleged. Monica's pulse was steady. She'd spent 3 nights preparing for this. 3 nights working every problem her father had ever attempted. 3 nights becoming fluent in his language. We're going to give you 3 problems, Dr. Wu said. Graduate level, you'll solve them at the board. We'll observe your process, your methodology. If you demonstrate genuine understanding, the charges will be reconsidered. And if I don't? Monica asked. Dean Hendricks smiled thinly. Then you'll be expelled for academic fraud. Dr. Brennan slid a paper across the table. First problem. You have 20 minutes. Monica stood, walked to the board, read the problem. It was a quantum entanglement proof, dense, complex, designed to take a doctoral student 40 minutes minimum. She picked up the marker, started writing. She didn't use the standard approach. She used her father's rotation method, entering the problem from the manifold interior. The equations collapsed into elegant simplicity. 12 minutes. Done. Dr. Wu leaned forward. That's not a conventional method. No, sir. It's more efficient. Where did you learn it? Monica met his eyes. I derived it myself. He didn't look convinced. Second problem. This one was harder. A thermodynamic boundary condition that required integrating across four-dimensional phase space. The kind of problem that made graduate students cry. Monica solved it in 15 minutes using a topological transformation she'd found in her father's 1993 notebook. Dr. Brennan's expression shifted. Not quite belief, but doubt in her doubt. Third problem, she said quietly. The final problem was vicious. A partial differential equation nested in quantum field theory with boundary conditions that seemed deliberately contradictory. Monica recognized it immediately. It was a variant of the exact problem Frank had put on the board. The problem he'd stolen from her father. She worked for 18 minutes. Her hand moved with absolute confidence. Because she wasn't just solving the problem. She was demonstrating Method C in its purest form. The method Marcus Davis had created and Donald Frank had claimed. When she finished, the room was silent. Dr. Wu was staring at the board like he'd seen a ghost. Where did you learn this method? Monica turned to face them. From my father's research notebooks, Marcus Davis, PhD candidate 1992 to 1995. Dissertation advisor, Donald Frank. She pulled the yellowed proposal from her bag. The same research Professor Frank published under his own name in September 1995. And she slid it across the table. The hearing room was packed. Word had spread. Students lined the walls. Faculty filled every seat. News cameras clustered in the back because someone had leaked the story to the press. Professor accused of stealing research from dead students' work had gone viral overnight. Monica sat at the respondents' table, alone. Her mother and grandmother sat 3 rows back, hands clasped together. Professor Frank entered at 9:02 a.m., flanked by 2 university lawyers. He looked calm, confident, a man who'd won this fight 24 years ago and expected to win it again. Dean Hendricks called the hearing to order. We're here to address academic integrity charges filed by Professor Donald Frank against sophomore Monica Davis and counter allegations raised during the preliminary examination. Her voice was careful, controlled. Professor Frank, please present your case. Frank stood, smoothed his tie. This is quite simple. Ms. Davis accessed my private research files and used my proprietary methodology to fraudulently demonstrate knowledge she doesn't possess. I have documented Method C. Monica's voice cut through the room like a blade. Frank stopped, turned to look at her. That's what you call it in your private notes, isn't it? The rotation method. Your proprietary approach. Monica stood. Except you didn't create it. You stole it from Marcus Davis in April 1995. The room erupted. Cameras flashed. Frank's lawyers started objecting. Dean Hendricks banged her gavel. Ms. Davis, you'll have your turn to... I have documentation. Monica pulled out the 1995 proposal. Marcus Davis's original dissertation proposal, dated April 3, 1995. Submitted to the doctoral committee with Method C fully detailed. 6 months before Professor Frank published his so-called groundbreaking paper. She handed copies to the panel. To Frank's lawyers, one to the press. Frank's face had gone white. That's fabricated. A desperate attempt to... Professor Eleanor Vaughan. Monica's voice rang clear. You were on the dissertation committee in 1995. You reviewed my father's proposal. Is this document authentic? Every head turned to the back of the room where Vaughan stood, trembling, 70 years old, and finally finding her courage. Yes. Her voice cracked. That is Marcus Davis's original work. I recommended its immediate approval. Professor Frank delayed the decision, then published the research as his own 6 months later. I witnessed the theft, and I've lived with that shame for 24 years. The room exploded again. Frank lunged forward. She's lying. This is a coordinated attack. Dr. Wu, Dr. Brennan. Monica turned to the MIT and Stanford professors who'd examined her. In your expert opinion, did I demonstrate genuine mastery of Method C during my examination? Dr. Wu stood slowly. Miss Davis demonstrated not just mastery, but intuitive understanding that suggests long-term study and original development. The method she used is identical to the approach in this 1995 proposal. Dr. Brennan nodded. Furthermore, Professor Frank's 1995 publication contains notation and structural elements that appear to be deliberate obfuscations of the original work, as if someone was trying to hide the source. Frank's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. Frank shook his head violently, but his hands were shaking. Dean Hendricks looked at the proposal, at the notebooks Monica had placed on the table, at Frank's collapsing composure. Professor Frank, do you have any evidence that Method C was your original creation prior to April 1995? Silence. Professor Frank? His mouth opened. Nothing came out, because there was no evidence. There never had been. Dean Hendricks closed the folder in front of her. This hearing is adjourned, pending a full investigation into allegations of academic theft. Professor Frank, you are suspended immediately pending review. Ms. Davis, all charges against you are dismissed with prejudice. The gavel struck. Monica turned to look at her mother, tears streaming down both their faces. After 24 years, Marcus Davis's name would finally be restored. The ghost in the back row had just rewritten history. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as can ever imagine. I'll see you in the next one.